What's going on, people? It's Kish, Yardy Views and Vlogs, or Kish Yardy Gaming Nation, whichever you want to call it. Today's topic is going to be about FBA and this ADOS people versus Caribbean blacks. Now, I don't put who FBA are and who ADOS is on the entire Black American population. I think this is just a sector group, right? ADOS has been exposed already by plenty of people on the internet as like a alt-right group that has a lot of xenophobia or black. What it is because the chick that I see that represents ADOS, she's brown skinned. So it's a lot of brown elite that want to be integrated with white people on the right. So they're trying to, I guess, a lot of white people on the right that don't like Caribbean blacks. That's my complexion or dark skin, right? So I think that's what it is, right? So I don't put. So when I make these videos, I'm not challenging Black Americans as a whole. I'm challenging FBA or ADOS, right? And mind you, I don't mind Black Americans coming up with something unique to their identity, right? Like if you want to call yourself foundational Black American, even though when I break it down today, you might want to rethink that. But I don't have an issue with them doing that because if you go to a lot of pro-Black spaces, that's what they were told to do. They were told to nationalize themselves, right? I don't have an issue doing that. My issue is that now when a lot of FBA or ADOS people like to make the lie saying that they embraced Caribbean blacks before when you didn't. You used to call Jamaican blacks flatbush banana boats. When you read the article West Indian Syndrome, he talks about that. A lot of the names that Caribbean blacks was getting from Black Americans. I've done videos of breaking that down already. A lot of Caribbean blacks from their own word of mouth have said that when they first came here in the 60s, even in the 1920s, they were not being fully embraced by Black Americans. Second, Caribbean blacks didn't have to cosplay anybody. We get it, right? What happened was during the when you look at the 1960s, when you look at those times and era, Caribbean blacks was trying to be themselves. They were trying to be anything but Black American. I ain't go cap on that. So they weren't trying to cosplay them. And the reason that being is because I broke this down in videos before already, is that a lot of Caribbean blacks, they come from Jamaica where they already beat their white oppressor. So they're in a majority Black country. So they don't see race like that. They see more class because the same Black person is an upper to middle class, right? So now they already fought through blood and sweat to gain that position to come to America and not have to start from the bottom again when they already did that in their country. You feel me? So, and then what happened was in order for Caribbean blacks to I guess, integrate with a lot of Black Americans, because a lot of how Black Americans didn't really accept their identity. A lot of Caribbean blacks, as I call them, bent the knee. Like they had to give up a lot of their identity to be part of the Black American space. Because this is why Kool Herc had to hide who he was. Because it was not accepted amongst Black Americans. Like you asked them. A lot of Caribbean blacks used to get bullied by Black Americans, teased by Black Americans, made fun of by Black Americans, flatbush banana boats, called them job snatchers. All kind of racial slurs, coconuts, all kind of racial slurs from Black Americans. So Black Americans were very hostile towards Caribbean blacks. So what Caribbean blacks had to do to fit in, they had to give up pieces of their identity or bend the knee, as I call it. All for now, after you shame them about their identity, shame them into integrating with you, to now years later say that they're cosplaying you. You know how fucking diabolical that is. That Caribbean blacks before, who are not trying to be like you, then you shamed them into being like you. And after they gave up bits and pieces of their identity to be like you, you dare not call them cosplaying today. Because if you look at the Nation of Islam, look at all those civil rights movements, it's a lot of Caribbean blacks that joined those movements. A lot of Pan-Africanism that joined those movements. Minister Farrakhan, I believe he's Trinidadian or from St. Kitts or whatever, right? And a lot of these people, a lot of these Caribbean blacks, right? they had to give up pieces of their identity to be black, like Black Americans, because, and then guess what? This is a repeated thing that happened, right? So when you get to the 2000s and stuff and shit like that, right? Shout out to DJ Head. When you get to like the late 90s, early 2000s, this is like before 9/11, Caribbean blacks said shit, was still getting the same bullshit from Black Americans. So Caribbean blacks said, you know what, fuck it. We're just going to go back to being Trinidadian and Jamaican, since you don't want us being part of your table. And every time we sit at your table, it's nothing but flatbush banana boats, coconuts, and all that other shit like they're saying today. We're just going to be ourselves. You know what the argument back then was? The argument was, see, them Jamaican niggas and them Haitian niggas and them Trinidadian niggas, they don't want to be like us. They want to be to themselves. But you're bullying them. You're calling them coconuts. They used to pick on the Haitians. All kind of shit. Coconuts, banana boats, all kind of stuff. So in order for us to sit at your table, we got to take disrespect. Then now when we remove ourselves from the table to go be ourselves, now it's you don't want to be black like us. Not if you're going to be greeted with disrespect. And here we are again. This is just a repeated cycle between Black Americans and Caribbean blacks. And then the Black Americans make it seem as if they did nothing wrong. When all the Caribbean blacks is calling you a lazy black ass American is because you calling me a job snatcher. Because I'm going to hustle and take the jobs that you didn't want. The jobs that you didn't want back then, that's what the Caribbean niggas was taking. The jobs I'm talking about is like the nurses' jobs. It's like the dishwasher jobs. It's like the housekeeping jobs. There's a lot of jobs that Black Americans at the time did not want to get or work. So what the Caribbean blacks did is that they took those jobs, saved their money, and opened up their own businesses in places like Brooklyn and Harlem. All right? I'm going to break down that history. I think I have broken down that history. But anyway, let's get into the topic, right? First of all, I got to separate myself from everybody. Because I see what's going on in these spaces. It's a whole left versus right, Caribbean black, whole right or right versus left versus Democrat. This is my position in politics, right? This is me, right? I am a balanced classical liberal, right? I am conservative, order and tradition. I am for freedom and responsibility, maximum freedom, limited government, right? So I'm for maximum freedom, freedom and responsibility, and order and tradition, which means I want freedom. I still want to have government, limited government in it, but limited, only to enforce or to protect the rights of the people, right? I want maximum freedom, but with responsibility, morals, and ethics, right? So I'm not a bleeding heart liberal, and I'm not an alt-right conservative. I'm in the middle. I'm the middle ground. This is my position. So I call out both sides when I see front of me. I call out liberals who want to give immigrants stuff, or illegal migrants, illegal migrants, things that they have to be an American to get access to social programs. They have to go through the proper way. They got to be here 5 or 10 years more, pay taxes, work, and contribute to the American pot to gain American benefits. Like my parents did. My Jamaican parents came here in the 80s. And my father was a janitor, and then he became a cook. And he did that job for a long damn time. Got a 2-family house and all of that. Now, my mother, she worked at St. Vincent Hospital for 27 years. She was a nurse's aide. My older sister joined the military. She served as a military police, and she became a teacher. My brother, same thing. All of my family, right? I have a cousin. He served in the military. He was a cop in Florida, and he's now a realtor. He sells houses now. So I have Caribbean family that has been here since the 80s and the 90s. Legally, they worked and bust their ass to put to the American pot. These are the immigrants that actually deserve a piece of the American pie because they put it into the system. They serve the country, right? So this is what I mean by unbalanced, right? So if I see a Caribbean black in America doing some fuck shit, I'm going to call you out. Just going to let you know. That's like I call it Black America now. Right? Etymological roots of Black. Etymological roots of Black. The English word black comes from Old High English blake, meaning dark, ink colored, or without light. Originally, it had no racial connotation. It described shades and tones, not people. However, by the mid 1500s to 1600s, the early colonial slave trading period, Black began to be normalized, associated with evil, filth, debt, sin, and absence of purity. This moral meaning was then transferred to people from Africa as part of the colonial justification for slavery. The colonial legal usage in America. When the English began enslaving Africans in the 1600s, they needed a legal and social category to separate them from Europeans and indigenous people. That's when Black became more than a description. It became a legal. And by the way, remember to like, share, and subscribe to this video, right? And take your time to watch the video. You don't have to watch it all at once in one day. You can pause it and then watch it another time. You know, that's for you people who have ADHD like me. All right. That's when Black became a description. It became more than a description. It became a legal and racial classification tied to status and property. Virginia Slave Code 1705 and other colonial laws began codifying Negro and Black as synonymous with enslaved African ancestry. White became the legal term for free European Christian subjects. So Black meant non-Christian, enslaved, non-European, and socially dead, a category of exclusion from the rights and humanity of whiteness. In short, Black in early America was a legal fiction designed to mark a group of people as permanent outsiders, property rather than citizens. Diasporic and transatlantic usage across the Atlantic world, Caribbean, South America, etc. Similar systems emerged. The Spanish used Negro, Black, and Moreno, while the French used Neo or racialized labels for Africans. These terms were used in plantation societies to divide labor and create caste hierarchies: mulatto, quadroon, octoroon. Like that's how that is in Jamaica, right? So slavery is not unique to the Black America. I remember like when Caribbean Blacks was like, yo, Caribbean Blacks went to slavery too. Then the FBA changed it to, well, you have to go to American slavery. First it was Jamaicans don't know what it's like to go through slavery. Then it became, then when Caribbean Blacks corrected them on that, then it became you have to go through American slavery. So FBA, they've been, which is correction, but FBA has been trying to monopolize who gets to define what Black is, as if Black is unique to them, to their definition. But it's not. You feel me? So these terms are used in plantation societies, right? So I already read that. So Black in the diaspora was not originally self-chosen. It was a branding term, a mark of ownership, inferiority, and dehumanization within the European racial order. So those of you calling yourself foundational Black Americans, whoever's giving y'all that, I think Tariq is just he's a pawn in the scheme. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a thing to identify yourselves, but y'all need to change the term Black. Just a hint, right? Fast forward to the 20th century. Why would you call yourself the what was it called? American descendants of slavery? Why would you call yourself that? ADOS. You don't hear when Asians is getting reparations. You don't hear them talking about we the descendants of slavery. Anyway, the civil rights and Black power movements reclaim Black as a term of solidarity, beauty, and resistance. Figures like Malcolm X, whose mother was Caribbean, Stokely Carmichael, who was Trinidadian, I don't know, I think James Brown was Black American, right? Helped flip the meaning. Black is beautiful, turned a slur into a symbol of pride and self-definition. African Americans later emerged as a cultural and political refinement, connecting lineage to not just order, not just color, right? So the meaning of Black shifted from racial caste label to cultural identity, to symbol of political resistance and unity among African diaspora. Now, even though I view this as a noble cause, regardless of how you feel the word should sound, it's how the word is used politically in the objective realm, right? What does that mean? How the word, according to the law and what the law states the word is what matters. Because we live in a country that are rights laws. And when you go to a court of law, they're going to use what the law definition of the word is Black. When you're talking about nations and nationality, they're going to use what the definition of the word Black is, not what you believe it is, or you turn it to be, right? So that's the difference. But I like this noble cause, right? See what we see with Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X. Malcolm X's father was a Garveyite, and his mother was Caribbean. So Malcolm X was still forged by Caribbean ideals, right? And and some of y'all FBA go jump into my in my chat talking about you. But Marcus Garvey was loved by Americans and Jamaicans didn't accept it. In the same video where I debunked that, it wasn't that Jamaicans as a majority did not like Marcus Garvey. It was the octoroon or the quadroon or the light skinned mulatto elite that did not like Marcus Garvey, right? In Jamaica, you have something that we call the brown elite, where most of the politicians in that upper class realm are light skinned to mulatto, and they're in proximity to whatever European slave master that's like the Queen or whatever. Those are the group of people that did not like Marcus Garvey, not the majority of Black Jamaicans. The majority of African maroon Black Jamaicans, because my lineage is maroon Black, right? On both sides, my family, they're maroon Black, right? My father's father is maroon Black. Feel me? So maroon Black, you know what that means, right? So the majority of Black Jamaicans at the time accepted Marcus Garvey. It was the brown-skinned elite that did not accept Marcus Garvey. Just like you had the brown-skinned Black American elite who don't like Marcus Garvey, who didn't like Marcus Garvey. W. Du Bois was light-skinned. He was brown. Ironically, Tariq Nasheed is brown, I think. And the chick who's part of ADOS, who created ADOS, I forgot her name. She's brown skin, right? Black is beautiful and turned a slur into a symbol of pride and self-definition. African American later emerged as a. Also, I already read that, right? So, in the American context, the term Black was originally used as a racial code for property to mark those of African descent as not human, not Christian, not citizen. Over centuries, that imposed label was transformed into a badge of unity, self-respect, and defiance, uniting African descendants peoples globally who shared the history of oppression and survival. And that Black term, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael was Trinidadian. He coined the term Black Power and he pushed it. So when y'all call yourself Black, are y'all cosplaying the Trinidadian nigga that made the word or put power to the word? Over the centuries, the imposed label was, right, so I already read that. The American origin of the term Black, legal and colonial context. In British North America, what became the United States, the term Black emerged as a racial and legal label in the 17th century, as we discussed. It served to a legal and socially distinguished African enslaved from European free, a Native American displaced or enslaved. Black became synonymous with enslaved African descent. It had no national identity, only a racial property identity. The term was built into colonial law, especially in Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas. So for Black Americans, Black was an internal social and legal label created inside the system of American chattel slavery. When Caribbean Blacks migrated to the U.S. early 19th century onward, by the time large waves of Caribbean immigrants from Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, etc. arrived in the U.S. in the early 20th century, the American racial system already defined anyone of African descent as Black, right? And remember, like I said earlier, Caribbean Blacks in their own respective country, they fought and rebelled against that system, that white colonial system in their Jamaica, especially Haiti, had already defied an empire called the British Empire, and they defeated the British Empire, right? So they're already used to raising up and then beating their master and then defining what it is to be Black to them. And then in a majority Black country, they're creating their own caste system, their own classes system amongst each other. So they're already used to that. So now when they come into America now, it's not that they're trying to undermine or disrespect the Black Americans. They're just coming with a different mindset, a different mentality. In Jamaica, you have to hustle to eat bread. You have to hustle to eat your food. Right? In Jamaica, you can't be a punk or what's the saying we said, dog name your supper. So they come into America with a different mentality. not understanding how how Black Americans went through. So I do agree with Black Americans that Jamaicans don't understand it, but you don't understand. You too don't understand. Black Americans don't understand Jamaicans and where they're coming from with their mentality. If they're coming to America and I'm gonna say some hardcore truth right now, and they witness you Black Americans, yes sir, no sir, to a white dude, but they already beat a white man over there, they gonna look at you a certain way. They gonna look at you. Why you not fighting back? Why you sitting at the back of the bus? Why you letting this white man rape your women? Why you not fighting back? When they fought back, remember they fought the British Empire. The British Empire in the sugar cane plantation, they were fucking brutal to them Caribbean blacks, brutal, and they fought. I'm just telling you the mentality for this at the time, and why they had why them Jamaicans had that level of arrogance to them, especially towards white people or any black person that didn't have that same level of arrogance. That's where the arrogance came from. The arrogance came from I cut the head off my slave master. However, within Black community, there were often cultural and class distinctions. Caribbean blacks sometimes saw themselves as British subjects and carried a more colonial education class consciousness, which is correct. I'm not going to lie about that. Black Americans saw them as foreign but still black, while white society grouped everyone together. So in American society, where black became the umbrella term for all people of visible African descent, whether from the U.S. South, the Caribbean, or Africa, which they grouped out into a class system. And then just because you turn the world into something positive, how America sees the world according to the law of caste system, they treat you just like that. The Diaspora unification of the black. During the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power movements, the term black was reclaimed and expanded across the diaspora. Caribbean intellectuals and activists, Marcus Garvey, Stokely Carmichael, Toure, C.L.R. James, etc., played a huge role in shaping what black meant politically. Black became a Pan-African, that's what I'm saying. Kwame Toure is Trinidadian, so Stokely Carmichael. Go look him up. Black became a pan-diasporic identity, linking African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, and Afro-Latino under a shared struggle against colonialism and white supremacy, right? So you can't talk about the Civil Rights Movement. You can't talk about a lot of those movements back in those days without talking about Caribbean blacks who added to the pot, right? So by that time, black no longer just meant an African-American legal label. It became a global identity of resistance and pride among people of African descent, right? Still, again, that doesn't take away from the fact that how America looks at that word objectively according to the law, they look at it as a caste system. And as long as you accept that word, America's going to treat you how the law is supposed to, how the law defines that word, right? So to answer directly, the term black was originally American and colonial, used to define enslaved Africans as property. But because the same racial logic was used throughout the British, French, Spanish, and Dutch empires, it also applied to Caribbean blacks under respective colonial systems. By the mid-20th century, black became a shared diasporic identity, connecting Black Americans and Caribbean blacks under one global banner of resistance, pride, and unity. What Pan-African is, right? Let's go into that. Pan-Africanism began as a global movement of unity among people of African descent, emerging in the late 19th century, 19th-20th centuries. Its central belief, all African people on the continent or in the diaspora share a common destiny, shaped by colonialism, slavery, and racial oppression, and most therefore unite politically, economically, and culturally. Key early figures. Henry Sylvester Williams, Trinidadian, organized the 1900 Pan-African Conference in London. W. Du Bois developed the intellectual framework of Pan-African solidarity, which is crazy because him and Marcus Garvey did not fucking agree. Because W. Du Bois, he was a communist, and Marcus Garvey was a capitalist. And Marcus Garvey didn't believe in integration. He believed in walking away from that and creating your own black capitalist structure or whatever, right? Marcus Garvey popularized the mass movement of one God, one aim, one destiny, right? By the 1940s to the 1960s, Pan-African thought directly shaped the mindset of the leaders who would later guide the civil rights and Black Power movements. Right? African independence movements, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, were happening at the same time as U.S. civil rights struggles. Figures like Kwame, I don't even know how to say that name. Ghana, George Padmore, Trinidad shared ideas with Du Bois, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. Mind you, a lot of Martin Luther King Jr. speeches, he wrote them in Jamaica, or he was inspired by Jamaica, right? The success of African nations gained independence inspired U.S. activists to demand similar liberation from racial apartheid at home. A shift from Negro to Black. Pan-African thinkers encouraged Americans to reject European-imposed labels, reconnect with their African heritage. Negro was seen as a colonial term. Black became a political statement of solidarity with Africans and Caribbean people. This was popularized through slogans like "Black is beautiful," "I'm Black and I'm proud." Now you got a lot of African Blacks and even some Jamaicans, right, that don't agree with the term or label Black because of what its political meaning is. Not that they want to identify you with far as skin color, but what its political meaning is. Like a lot of Black Caribbean Blacks, they know that Black is a caste system. They understand that, so they don't accept that. A lot of Africans don't accept that either, right? Because what happens is, right, even me, when I'm around certain Europeans, I don't call myself Black. I'll call myself Jamaican American because I know there's certain Europeans who are very intelligent and know what they know. And if I allow them to call me Black, they know that they've conquered me. And I no longer now acknowledge my heritage and my nationality and my culture when I say I'm Black to them in those spaces. But when I'm amongst my own, like my own Black people, then I call myself Black. But when I'm amongst Europeans who know they shit, I gotta be on my shit. Right? If I, like, for example, if I go to Harvard or I go to one of those big Ivy League white schools, I call myself a Jamaican American. Why? Because if I let that European call me Black, they're gonna call me Black according to what the legal term is and how the old school racist Europeans used to use the term Black to conquer me and take me away from my heritage and nationality and my clan or my tribe. So I know that, right? Black became a political statement of solidarity with African and Caribbean people. This popularized through slogans like "Black is beautiful" and "I'm Black and I'm proud." Global consciousness. Leaders like Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, and later the Black Panther Party explicitly tied the American Black struggle to global anti-imperialist struggles. The only reason why I disagree with the Black Panther Party and W. Du Bois is because they're communists or socialists. Right? Now that's another video. They saw Black Americans not just as a U.S. minority, but as a part of the worldwide African diaspora under oppression. The redefinition of Black through Pan-Africanism. Before Pan-Africanist influence, Black in America was mostly a racial category tied to skin color and social inferiority. After Pan-Africanist influence, Black came to mean a political, cultural, and spiritual identity rooted in pride, resistance, and shared African heritage. So Pan-Africanism expanded Black from color to a consciousness. It linked African Americans to a global African family, rather than just an American racial minority, right? So Black FBA, you don't own Black. You feel me? Pan-Africanism deeply shaped the civil rights era, transforming Black from a category of oppression into a worldwide symbol of power, identity, and unity. It helped Black Americans see themselves not as isolated victims within America, but as part of the global family of African descendants fighting the same system of domination. The core arguments for reparation to Black Americans, right? This is where I agree with a lot of what a lot of Black Americans saying and where the reparations should be allocated to, right? So I'm going to be honest with that one. Reparations are primarily discussed in the context of descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States because chattel slavery was a U.S.-specific system of hereditary property status, right? African people brought to what became the U.S. were legally enslaved for life, with the status passed from mother to child per the 1662 Virginia law, right? This created generational wealth gaps, intergenerational trauma, and exclusion from economic, political, and social participation. Post-emancipation systematic oppression. Even after slavery ended in 1865 via the 13th Amendment, Jim Crow laws did not. So those of you that talk about, Abraham Lincoln, he didn't free the slave, he just emancipated them. You had a 13th Amendment that was added to the contract of the Constitution that solidified that. So shut the fuck up about it. Abraham Lincoln, he didn't free the slaves. The emancipation was just a speech. It was just a declaration. Why the fuck did they make it a damn 13th Amendment then? That 13th Amendment in that contract called the Constitution legalized it, cemented it. Now you have to obey it as federal law. Jim Crow laws deny Black Americans land, voting rights, education, and economic opportunity. Redlining, employment, discrimination, and segregation prevented accumulation of wealth, home ownership, and social capital. Mass incarceration and discriminatory policing continue these patterns in modern times. Objective fact: the economic and social disadvantage experienced by descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S. are traceable directly to historical, legally sanctioned systems of oppression unique to this population, right? So yeah, you guys gotta make. So right, no, so I'm gonna help my Black American brethren, right? When you make the arguments about Jim Crow, you gotta go into great detail. How did the voting rights affect you? What were lands you were denied from? What was the education you got prevented from learning? What was the economic opportunity you were denied? How did redlining affect you? Like, I'm going to do a video about credit and debt, and I'm going to show the connection of how the Black people got predatory lending. How did that affect Black people? So I'm going to show you from how the debt and credit system, how they use the debt and credit system to fuck Black people and redlining. I'm going to break the redlining part down in the next video, right? You got to break it down detailed. How did it affect you? What state affected you? You understand? You got to break it down detail by detail, right? You can't just say voting rights. That's vague, right? You can't just say redlining. That's vague. What was the process in redlining? What was the language used in redlining? You got to go into great detail about these things, right? Lineage matters in the reparation debate. The key issue often comes down to who qualifies. Descendants of U.S. enslaved Africans are prominently group considered for reparation because they were subject to the specific system of U.S. chattel slavery and post-slavery systematic discrimination. Caribbean Blacks are African immigrants while they share African ancestry. They were not born into the U.S. slave system and therefore did not directly inherit the legal and economic disadvantage imposed by the U.S. institutions. Caribbean immigrants arriving in the 20th century often came already free, though they still face racism in the U.S. Now, if FBA came out making this argument instead of the bullshit that they're making, talking about the Caribbean Blacks, you cause all the problems in America, and a bunch of you are just a bunch of curry goat tethers, as Tariq Nasheed would say. I could call you Tariq Nasheed. You look like a watermelon FBA, a watermelon pork belly. Soul food watermelon, grape juice soda, grape juice face, right? This distinction is critical in debates over reparation because it's about historical causality and lineage, not simply Black identity in the cultural or racial sense. Black identity versus reparation eligibility. Racial identity Black is not the same as reparation eligibility. You can be Black culturally or racially without being descendants of the U.S. slaves. Reparations are typically framed as lineage-based, not simply skin color-based. Caribbean and African immigrants often face racial discrimination, but did not inherit U.S.-specific slavery oppression. So the reparation argument usually excludes them, though they may share cultural solidarity with Black Americans, right? So, what does this all of this means? It's just lineage-based. It's just Black America. It's just Black Americans specific to the U.S. descendancy, right? That's where the reparations will go to, all right? And you know what? I think the reason being why America is denying Black Americans reparations, because they want you to keep being in the defeated position. And I think now that the Democrats or the right are helping you with that. The Democrats are just talking. All right. The liberals, they're just talking. And in New York, Black Americans in New York, you're definitely not getting. Black people in New York, period, you're definitely not getting no help with this motherfucker, Boudellini, Hala Habib nigga, this Muslim communist. Yo, New York City, we in for a ride. Hopefully we can handle it. Right? So let's go. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, W. Du Bois, and later Marcus Garvey all addressed the inequities faced by Black Americans. Some advocated for economic redress or return to Africa. Garvey. Modern proposals like H.R. 40 aim to study and design reparations programs specifically for descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S. Caribbean Blacks, African immigrants, or Afro-Latinos are often excluded from formal reparation programs because the harm being addressed were specific to U.S. slavery and post-slavery discrimination. I agree with that. And I will combat any Caribbean Black or African immigrant or even Afro-Latinos, all these different fucking names that we're branded with. No, let Black Americans get their victory. Let them have their reparations. That reparation is symbolic to their victory, to what they had to go through. So I would argue, I'll agree with them, Black Americans with that, right? Reparations be specific to them. It shouldn't go to Afro-Latinos or African immigrants or Caribbean Blacks. It should go specific to Black Americans. Now, this is the argument that Tariq Nasheed was making. I have no issue. The rest of the whole argument, the xenophobia that's coming with it, this is what's muddying your argument. Right? Reparations are owed to U.S. Black Americans because their ancestors were enslaved in the U.S., created multi-generational harm, legal, social, and economic systems in the U.S., specifically excluded them from wealth accumulation. Lineage matters. Descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S. are eligible. Black immigrants or Caribbean Blacks are generally not eligible, though they share racial solidarity. Pan-African identity does not automatically confer reparation eligibility. It's about direct historical causation in the U.S. context. All right? So, I'm just going to speak about this, right? Imported as enslaved laborers, during the 17th and 18th centuries, many enslaved Africans came to the Americans. Colonies via the Caribbean, Barbados, Jamaica, and other British Caribbean colonies. Some of these Caribbean-born Blacks, called Barbados slaves in Virginia, were brought directly to the southern colonies to work on plantation. Role in early resistance and labor organization. Many Caribbean Blacks brought experience from plantation systems in the Caribbean, including knowledge of resistance, escape, and rebellion, which contributed to slave uprisings in the American colonies. Example, the Gullah Geechee culture. In South Carolina and Georgia shows how Caribbean is influenced from enslaved Africans. Hold on. A damn cat. Fucking with me. Look at this. Look at it. Hold on. All right. Example, the Gullah Geechee culture in South Carolina and Georgia shows heavy Caribbean influence from enslaved Africans. Fact, Caribbean Blacks were not exempt from U.S. slavery. They were fully integrated into the chattel system. Don't worry, I'm going to tie it together. Caribbean immigrants arrived free or enslaved in northern ports, especially New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia. Example, populations Jamaican, Haitians, and Bohemians. Racial discrimination they experienced included segregation in housing and employment, denial of certain labor unions and professional jobs, social exclusion from white-dominated society. Jim Crow in the South, Caribbean Blacks were legally considered Black, are subject to Jim Crow laws. They're barred from white schools, segregated in public facilities, and restricted in voting and property rights. Even in the North, while de jure segregation wasn't as strict, de facto segregation and discrimination was pervasive. Housing, jobs, schools. Fact, Caribbean Blacks were classified as Black under U.S. racial codes and therefore subject to racial oppression. All right. Redlining, starting in the 1930s, the federal government, via the Homeowners Loan Corporation, mapped cities and denied mortgage loans to Black neighborhoods. So this is something that Black Americans can use. Go dig into this. I might dig into it myself, but y'all go dig into that. Caribbean Blacks concentrated in areas like Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, and Newark, which is New Jersey, were targeted by these discriminatory practices. Right? They had access to homeownership in white neighborhoods confined to overcrowded and under-resourced neighborhoods. Many Caribbean immigrants who came to New York City in the late 19th to early 20th centuries experienced systematic barriers to property ownership, wealth accumulation, and education for their children. Caribbean Blacks were economically and socially segregated, experienced the same structural inequalities as African Americans, right? Partition in the civil rights and Black Power movements. Stokely Carmichael, Trinidadian leader in the SNCC and Black Power advocacy, Claudia McKay and Marcus Garvey brought Pan-Africanist ideology to Harlem Renaissance and Black activism. Caribbean-born educators, intellectuals, and activists often bridged U.S. civil rights and global anti-colonial struggles. They experienced discrimination personally, which fueled their activism. Housing discrimination and redlining in New York City and all other urban areas. Segregated schools limited employment opportunities. Police harassment and systematic racism similar to African Americans. Fact, Cuban blacks were classified as black in the U.S., and this classification subjected them to the same systematic racism as African Americans, even if their historical lineage differed, right? Cuban blacks were subject to racial discrimination in the U.S., including redlining. So I don't have to read this again. So yeah, I could take your time and pauses to read this, right? Caribbean-born enslaved people contribute labor skills, knowledge of plantation systems, sometimes later inspire resistance efforts within American slavery. Objective fact, Cuban blacks are fully integrated into the U.S. chattel slavery system. Cuban blacks arrived free or semi-free in the northern U.S. cities such as New York. So this is in the early 19th centuries, right? And Philadelphia. They experienced systematic racial discrimination similar to African Americans. Segregation, limited employment, social exclusion, and prejudice in schools and public spaces. So y'all can pause this at the video and read this for yourselves, right? So Caribbean blacks helped to shape the black identity in America, right? Stokely Carmichael, Marcus Garvey, C.L.R. James. And when y'all say that, y'all accepted Marcus Garvey, you accepted his teaching and you embodied his teaching. You didn't have to accept his teaching, but you did. So that means that black Americans, you followed his influence. He influenced you. He pushed you. Okay. Cuban blacks were sometimes gatekept, criticized, or socially excluded by African Americans. They responded, creating a bi-directional culture and political exchange. Cuban nations had victories over colonialism. So this is right here, right? So, mutual dynamic with African Americans. Historical interaction between Caribbean blacks and African Americans were mutual, not one-sided. Caribbean blacks were sometimes gatekept, criticized, or socially excluded by African Americans. They responded, creating a bi-directional culture and political exchange, right? So that means they created their own stuff, their own shit. Caribbean nations had victories over colonial slavery. Countries like Jamaica, Haiti, and Barbados achieved independence or ended slavery through rebellion, resistance, and legal change prior to the full U.S. emancipation. By contrast, Black Americans endured centuries of slavery and systematic oppression without achieving reparatory victory, making U.S. reparations a unique and necessary redress, right? That means that, yes, Caribbean blacks, we acknowledge, or the Black Americans can acknowledge that you contribute to the Black American identity, but that doesn't take away from the fact that reparations should go strictly to Black Americans of that lineage. You're helping them to fight to gain their victory, but the victory should be to them. Just like if Black Americans were to help Jamaicans fight something, right? But that doesn't mean that the spoils of that should go to Black Americans, should go to Jamaicans. They're just helping us fight something. What the logic applies to Black Americans, Caribbean blacks, and I'm telling y'all that as a Jamaican, right? Their reparations should go for them. All the thing part we're playing is we're helping them fight that struggle. But the reparations should go directly to Black Americans because it solidifies their victory over here. Where we already had our victories. They need to get their victory, right? Oh yeah. Caribbean blacks participated in the U.S. slave system both as enslaved laborers and later as immigrants experiencing racial discrimination. They contributed to the shaping of Black identity in America, influencing activism, culture, and Pan-African thought. Caribbean blacks experienced redlining, Jim Crow, systematic discrimination, objectively similar to African Americans. Despite shared oppression, reparations in the U.S. should be directed to Black Americans because Caribbean blacks and their nations had already secured victories over colonial masters through rebellion and emancipation. Black Americans, specifically descendants of U.S. enslaved Africans, have endured a unique historical oppression without such victory. Caribbean blacks should support reparations for Black Americans, not contest it, as reparations symbolize recognition for centuries of labor, oppression, and struggles in America. Historical conflicts or mutual criticism between Caribbean blacks and African Americans were bi-directional. rooted in social and cultural dynamics, not a single-sided attempt to deny the other's legitimacy. It was both mutual. Right? Objectivity. Caribbean blacks play a role. I don't have to repeat this again. Right? So yeah. Shaping black identity and experience systematic racial discrimination. However, reparations in the U.S. should remain specific to Black Americans because Caribbean nations historically achieved independence and abolition. I don't know how to say that word. Whereas Black Americans did not. The unique history of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and the systematic exclusion in the U.S. directly disadvantaged Black Americans across generations. Caribbean blacks' contribution to the civil rights and Black identity in America should be acknowledged as supportive and complementary to the struggle for reparations. That is a claim to the reparations themselves. Therefore, Caribbean blacks historically and presently play a vital ally role helping Black Americans achieve recognition, justice, and historical redress, while the repertory focus should remain on the descendants of U.S. slavery. Now, Caribbean blacks, because of FBA's behavior, we can just opt out of that. In my opinion, I think we should separate ourselves from that because I'm tired of the back and forth. Now the shit is going on the internet. You feel me? And Black Americans, just like white people, how white people don't acknowledge Black Americans are not going to acknowledge Caribbean blacks in the fight in America, contributing to the identity of blackness. They're not going to acknowledge it. Just like white people don't want to acknowledge them, their contributions to America, which is crazy. African Americans in the U.S. prominent descendants of enslaved Africans, both groups historically, right? FBI is a self-identified group emphasizing descendants of U.S. slavery, often framing themselves as the original Black Americans. ADOS, American Descendant Slavery, similarly focus on lineage-based claims for reparations and cultural ownership. Reports indicate that some ADOS rhetoric is influenced by external political agendas, including certain conservative groups that aim to sow division between Black Americans and Black immigrants, especially targeting dark-skinned Caribbean blacks, right? Historical tensions from the 1920s to the 60s, there were social cultural tensions between Caribbean blacks and African Americans in urban centers. Misunderstandings arose over labor, politics, and cultural norms, and perceptions of identity and authority. These conflicts were bidirectional, not solely Caribbean or African American driven. Civil rights era identity formation. Caribbean blacks contributed heavily to the civil rights activism, Pan-African thought, and shaping Black identity in America. African Americans maintain a distinct cultural identity tied to the U.S., historically experienced slavery and systematic oppression. Right? FBA or ADOS are not representative of all Black Americans. They constitute a specific subgroup with distinct political agendas and historical narratives. Online reports suggest some rhetoric carries xenophobic undertones, especially against Caribbean blacks. These groups may amplify historical tension to advance their political aims. Caribbean blacks should respect Black Americans and their historical struggle, particularly regarding reparations and identity formation. Black Americans should not disrespect or deny Caribbean Black identity, as Caribbean blacks define their blackness through lived experience and cultural identity. Black identity is not owned by any group. Expression may differ, but blackness is collective, defined, and experienced across the diaspora. Right? Historical misunderstandings require contextual discussion. The social tensions from 1920s to the 60s must be understood fully and objectively, considering Caribbean blacks' responses to systematic discrimination and immigrant status, African Americans' response to centuries of U.S. specific oppression. Proper discussion can resolve lingering misunderstandings and build mutual respect. All right. Y'all can pause the video and y'all can look at this. And this is the final one. All right. Y'all can pause it for a bit and look into this right quick. Now, let me say my piece before I close out. Now, again, I hang in the balance, and I'm trying to separate myself when I do topics like these from the what everybody else is doing in the space. But I'm not afraid to kick a joke and punch you Black Americans in the face, or your FBA in your face. I'm gonna come start doing shit like that. But how I do it is gonna be intellectual and it's gonna be witty and smart, right? But I still kind of want to separate myself from the whole, coconut and watermelon head shit. Because I can play in that field. But I think it takes away from the message or the point, right? And then I think what happens when you now I get it, y'all trying to go out Truth Nasheed, yeah, by all means, right? I think me personally, I think Truth Nasheed, he's an agent himself, right? But what I want to say is this: Black Americans do have a right to nationalize themselves. They have a right to define their own blackness, like a Caribbean black does. I think the problem is that when we try to infringe on each other and then try to disrespect each other at the same time, right? I think there needs to be some kind of mutual respect towards each other. And, you know, as Caribbean blacks, we got to respect how Black Americans want to operate. And I think that's what Caribbean blacks was trying to do in the 60s and trying to do in the 20s, right? They were just trying to stick to themselves and build off their own muscle and might. And then what happened was a lot of the Black Americans was like, yo, why y'all not fighting with us? And when we tried to separate from them, the argument was they're not trying to be like us. And then when we integrated with them, now it's that we copycatting them. Or what's the shit called again? I said it earlier. Copycat. Cosplaying them. Right? So it's like Caribbean blacks, we couldn't win for nothing. If we stayed out of the fight with them and build ourselves off our own might, they called us arrogant. They called us job snatchers. And then when we integrated with them, now it's called that we cosplaying them. You can't win. So it is what it is. Anyway, this is Kish Yardy Gamer Nation. Remember to like, share, and subscribe.